On a fateful December 20th, 1943, a B-17 Flying Fortress, famously christened Lucky Strike, battled its way across the vast expanse of the English Channel. It moved with the arduous struggle of a severely wounded beast, stubbornly clinging to life. The No. 3 engine, a vital component, was utterly obliterated, not merely incapacitated. It had been violently ripped from its mountings by a brutal burst of flak over the heavily defended skies of Bremen, leaving a gaping, ragged void in the wing structure. Streams of hydraulic fluid, a stark crimson against the dull metal, painted ominous streaks along the aircraft's fuselage, a grim testament to its injuries. The ball turret, a critical defensive position, hung at a perilous and sickening angle, its gunner having already been tragically lost. According to every official manual, every stringent regulation, and every precise physics calculation diligently published by the Army Air Forces, this severely compromised bomber should have plunged irrevocably into the frigid waters of the North Sea at least 20 minutes prior. Yet, against all odds, it defiantly remained airborne. Its pilot, Lieutenant Marcus Webb, propelled this battered machine through the unforgiving skies, a feat achieved through a powerful combination of raw physical strength, fervent prayer, and an elusive, undocumented intervention, a modification performed by the ground crew 3 weeks earlier that existed outside the realm of any official instruction. When the Lucky Strike finally concluded its harrowing journey, gracefully touching down on the runway at RAF Bassingbourn, it did so precariously on a single landing gear leg. The other had stubbornly refused to extend, primarily because, from a technical standpoint, there was no hydraulic pressure remaining to facilitate its deployment. Webb skillfully skidded the massive fortress along the tarmac, creating a spectacular shower of sparks that illuminated the twilight, and was clearly visible from the distant control tower, a mile away. The waiting crash crews, bracing for the grim task of extracting casualties, were instead met with the astonishing sight of 8 men emerging from the wreckage under their own power, visibly shaken but miraculously alive. The 9th crew member, the unfortunate ball turret gunner, had been tragically lost during the mission over the target, but the rest of the crew had defied the impossible and returned home. This was despite flying an aircraft that, as detailed in a subsequent post-flight analysis, had experienced a complete loss of primary hydraulic function, sustained catastrophic damage to its intricate fuel system, and suffered multiple electrical failures that, by all engineering principles, should have rendered controlled flight utterly unachievable. Group Commander Colonel James Albertson, a man of considerable experience, surveyed the mangled remnants of the aircraft on the tarmac and articulated the single, most pressing inquiry. How? The official, bureaucratically approved explanation for this extraordinary survival would necessitate months of meticulous investigation. However, the true, unspoken answer was already diligently at work in a nearby hangar, merely 200 yards distant, his hands deeply immersed in the intricate engine cowling of another B-17. He was engaged in making unauthorized modifications, alterations that would have undoubtedly led to a court-martial if anyone had bothered to meticulously document his actual, unorthodox activities. By late 1943, the Army Air Forces confronted a profound and unsettling predicament, one they struggled to adequately articulate within their standard after-action reports. Bombers were being lost at an alarming rate. While a certain degree of attrition was anticipated, this was, after all, a brutal aerial war waged over Nazi Germany, and the formidable Luftwaffe was certainly not in the business of bestowing participation trophies. The unsettling reality was that aircraft were succumbing to damage that, by conventional understanding, should not have proven fatal. A seemingly isolated flak hit, if precisely striking a critical vulnerability, could cause a B-17, an aircraft renowned for its purported ability to withstand punishment that would utterly shred three smaller fighters, to simply plummet from its formation, a solitary descent into oblivion. There was an inherent, fundamental flaw embedded within the aircraft's design, a deficiency that Boeing was understandably reluctant to acknowledge. The Pentagon, for its part, exhibited little interest in confronting such an inconvenient truth, and tragically, flight crews were paying the ultimate price. The miraculous survival of the Lucky Strike was not merely a stroke of fortune. It stood as irrefutable evidence that an individual had successfully identified this critical design vulnerability and, through unconventional means, had rectified it, employing methods that would undoubtedly induce severe consternation among procurement officers. This compelling narrative delves into the extraordinary tale of how the unauthorized, yet ingenious, modifications implemented by a single, resourceful mechanic transformed the B-17 from what was, on certain perilous missions, a statistical death sentence, into the legendary, resilient survivor it is revered as today. The genesis of this remarkable transformation lay with an individual who had acquired his exceptional aptitude for mechanical repair not within the structured confines of a technical school, but rather within the gritty, practical environment of a Depression-era garage in Pittsburgh. There, the guiding principle was starkly simple. Make it work or it doesn't get fixed. Staff Sergeant Paul Zook, by the strictures of his official assignment, was not supposed to be engaged in the intricate repair of airplanes. His Army Air Force personnel file explicitly indicated that his impressive scores on mechanical aptitude tests merited his assignment to the motor pool, a domain dedicated to trucks, jeeps, and the generally unglamorous machinery essential for the smooth operation of an air base. However, a discerning individual within the assignment office at Bassingbourn, having reviewed Zook's civilian work history, made a pivotal lateral transfer, a decision that, in retrospect, likely spared scores of lives. Prior to the outbreak of the war, Zook had operated a bustling repair shop nestled within Pittsburgh's vibrant Polish Hill neighborhood. In this demanding environment, he had masterfully kept a diverse array of vehicles operational: coal trucks, delivery vans, and even the occasional bootleggers illicitly souped-up Ford, all while adhering to budgets so meager they made the poverty line seem generous. He arrived at Bassingbourn in August 1943, a man of 26 years, with the indelible mark of grease already ingrained beneath his fingernails, and an inherently pragmatic attitude toward regulations that his commanding officers would variously find both profoundly exasperating and utterly invaluable. During his inaugural week on the flight line, he observed a crew chief meticulously rejecting a B-17 for a seemingly minor issue, a hairline crack in a hydraulic line. This rejection was standard procedure, meticulously adhering to the letter of the regulations, and entirely correct according to Technical Order 012 EG2. However, the requisite replacement part was on an indefinite back order, rendering the aircraft grounded. Consequently, the scheduled mission proceeded, but one bomber short. Zook, ever the pragmatist, inquired why they couldn't simply bypass the damaged section and reroute the hydraulic fluid through the secondary line. The crew chief regarded him with an expression that suggested Zook had proposed mending the wings with baling wire. "That's not in the manual, Sergeant," he stated curtly. Zook's retort, delivered with a thick Pittsburgh accent that was robust enough to be cut with a wrench, quickly became legendary within the maintenance section. "The manual didn't grow up fixing trucks during the Depression. I did." Herein lay the fundamental distinction that set Zook apart from the numerous other mechanics who had diligently learned their trade within the structured confines of Army technical schools. These formally trained individuals possessed the commendable ability to follow a technical order with absolute precision, executing repairs exactly as the Boeing engineers had meticulously specified, thereby maintaining a B-17 to its precise factory specifications. Zook, however, possessed a unique capacity to scrutinize a failing system and pose a crucial question that the original engineers had apparently overlooked. What happens when this breaks over Germany and there's no parts depot available at 20,000 feet? His true genius did not reside in merely comprehending how mechanical systems were designed to function flawlessly. Rather, it lay in his profound understanding of how those very systems could continue to operate, albeit imperfectly, even when everything else had gone catastrophically awry. By October, other observant mechanics began to notice an unusual and recurring phenomenon. Aircraft that Zook had personally serviced exhibited a peculiar tendency to return from missions that, by all logical assessments, they should not have survived. For instance, a bomber on which he had worked sustained a direct flak hit through its hydraulic bay. According to all established protocols, it should have resulted in a complete loss of all landing gear control. Yet the pilot miraculously managed a successful wheels-down landing. Another aircraft, or bird, as they were affectionately called, lost its primary electrical system after a fierce fighter attack. Nevertheless, its essential instruments continued to function just long enough to guide the navigator safely home. Coincidence, the crew chief dismissively declared. Lucky coincidence. Zook, however, harbored no belief in mere luck. His unwavering faith lay in the principles of redundancy, in the strategic implementation of backup systems, and in the ingenious rerouting of critical functions through alternative pathways that simply did not exist within the original Boeing blueprints. This was because Boeing, in its pursuit of elegant and efficient design, had apparently never fully contemplated the grim realities of what transpired when their beautiful, highly efficient, yet inherently single-point-of-failure designs encountered the brutal effectiveness of German 88mm flak. While his counterparts diligently replaced damaged parts with factory-approved components, Zook was engaged in an audacious process of redesigning entire systems on the fly. He accomplished this using an eclectic assortment of scavenged components, meticulously borrowed tubing from other aircraft, and electrical connections that, had an official inspector observed them, would have undoubtedly provoked immense distress. The other mechanics, witnessing his constant innovations, began to affectionately refer to him as the plumber, a moniker he earned because he was perpetually rerouting something, be it hydraulic lines, crucial fuel feeds, or complex electrical bundles. He would routinely dedicate countless hours beyond his official duty schedule, toiling late into the night within the cavernous hangars, a flashlight clenched between his teeth, painstakingly rewiring aircraft in ways that were never officially documented in the maintenance logs. This clandestine work was necessary because, technically speaking, his modifications violated an estimated 15 different Army regulations. When questioned about his tireless dedication and why he bothered, especially given that he could have comfortably remained in the motor pool, enjoying coffee and avoiding such perilous endeavors, Zook's answer was delivered with characteristic simplicity and profound conviction. Those guys fly the missions. The least I can do is make sure the plane doesn't kill them on the way home. The B-17 Flying Fortress was widely touted as an indestructible aerial behemoth. Boeing's marketing campaigns practically asserted this claim, and the initial combat reports from 1942 seemed to corroborate its formidable reputation. Fortresses frequently returned from arduous missions bearing the scars of battle, resembling flying cheese graters, with numerous holes punched through their wings and fuselages. Yet, with astonishing resilience, they continued to fly. Crews, with good reason, affectionately bestowed upon them the nickname, the Flying Fortress. These remarkable machines possessed an unparalleled ability to absorb punishment that would have utterly disintegrated a B-24, a contemporary bomber. However, by late 1943, a deeply unsettling pattern began to emerge within the lost statistics, a grim reality that no one in authority seemed eager to discuss. Aircraft were not merely being shot down by overwhelming, concentrated fighter attacks or by direct flak hits to unequivocally critical areas. Increasingly, they were succumbing to single points of failure. A solitary hit, if it struck precisely the wrong spot, could doom a bomber valued at $200,000 and carrying a crew of 10 highly trained airmen, sending it spiraling out of formation to vanish without a trace. The 8th Air Force, by the autumn of 1943, was experiencing a devastating loss rate of approximately 5% per mission. A simple calculation revealed the terrifying odds. A crew's chances of surviving a mandatory 25-mission tour were essentially a coin flip. Something insidious was causing the demise of B-17s, damage that, by all engineering logic, should not have been fatal. It ultimately required the keen eyes and unconventional insights of mechanics like Zook, who meticulously examined the wreckage, to definitively ascertain the root cause of the problem. The culprit was the hydraulic system. The B-17's intricate hydraulic network governed virtually every critical function essential for survival in combat: the deployment of landing gear, the application of brakes, the operation of wing flaps, and most crucially, the precise movement of the turret systems, which enabled gunners to effectively track and engage enemy fighters. Boeing had meticulously engineered an efficient system, with primary lines neatly bundled and routed through the fuselage. This design choice was entirely logical when designing for peacetime efficiency and ease of maintenance. However, efficiency, in this context, inadvertently translated to concentration. A single, well-placed piece of flak, piercing merely 6 inches of the fuselage in the wrong location, could instantaneously result in a catastrophic loss of hydraulic pressure to multiple vital systems simultaneously. A bomber could possess 3 perfectly functioning engines, an intact wing structure, and a healthy, capable crew. But without the crucial hydraulic pressure, the landing gear could not be lowered. An B-17 attempting a belly landing on an English runway, without its landing gear, very often became a B-17 engulfed in flames. A B-17 bomber often succumbed to the inferno of a raging fire. Beyond the immediate threat of flames, the aircraft's fuel system presented a particularly insidious hazard, frequently proving fatal to its occupants. The B-17 carried an impressive volume of 2,780 gallons of high-octane aviation fuel, distributed among 9 distinct tanks, 5 nestled within the wings and 4 situated in the fuselage. The design of the fuel delivery system was predicated on a logical principle. Fuel would flow progressively from the outer wing tanks inward, thereby meticulously preserving the aircraft's crucial balance. This seemingly judicious engineering, however, harbored a critical flaw. The vital fuel lines connecting these tanks traversed sections of the airframe that were directly exposed to the concentrated barrages of German fighter aircraft, especially during their perilous beam attacks launched from the 3 o'clock or 9 o'clock positions. A direct hit from a 20 mm cannon round to a fuel line did not merely result in a catastrophic and rapid loss of fuel. Far more direly, it unleashed a torrent of aviation gasoline, spraying indiscriminately within the confines of the airframe. Here, the volatile fuel encountered a perilous confluence of conditions: superheated metal components, the omnipresent danger of electrical sparks, and the biting cold of open air at -40 degrees Fahrenheit. This deadly combination created an almost perfect environment, ripe for either a devastating explosion and fire or the equally debilitating phenomenon of vapor lock, which would starve the engines of their lifeblood. Remarkably, Zook discerned a critical oversight that had eluded the meticulous scrutiny of official engineering reports. He observed that aircraft, which mysteriously plummeted from the skies, frequently exhibited telltale signs of fuel system anomalies prior to their impact. Pilots recounted harrowing experiences of their engines sputtering erratically, then failing completely, often followed by the entire bomber violently shaking itself apart or erupting into a catastrophic blaze. Subsequent post-crash investigations, when any discernible wreckage remained for analysis, consistently highlighted issues such as fuel contamination or the intrusion of air into the fuel lines. The underlying cause, Zook realized, was elegantly simple once illuminated. Enemy flak or machine gun fire would inevitably compromise a fuel line. This breach would then allow air to infiltrate the intricate fuel network. Consequently, the aircraft's engines would begin to fail in a grim, sequential progression, each one succumbing because it was drawing its vital sustenance from the same, now critically compromised, fuel system. The bomber, therefore, would not crash due to insurmountable structural damage, but rather because it was, in essence, slowly suffocating itself to death in the vast, unforgiving expanse of the sky. The engineers at Boeing had meticulously crafted an aircraft that performed with exquisite precision under optimal operating conditions. However, the brutal reality of aerial combat over Germany in 1943 was anything but ideal. It was an unforgiving environment where every single system within the aircraft needed to be designed with the grim expectation of sustaining damage, yet still retain its fundamental functionality. The B-17's true Achilles heel was not its armor protection or its formidable firepower, but rather its inherent design philosophy, which embraced single point of failure, vulnerabilities. This critical flaw was precisely what Zook, with his audacious and unauthorized modifications, began to systematically rectify, one ingenious alteration at a time. Zook's actions, while not strictly illegal in the conventional sense, were in fact far more precarious. They constituted unauthorized field modifications of combat aircraft systems, a transgression that carried severe implications. If a modified aircraft were to crash, and subsequent investigators traced the failure back to his unorthodox handiwork, he would undoubtedly face the grim prospect of a court-martial, potentially on charges as grave as negligent homicide. However, Zook had meticulously reevaluated the risks. He reasoned that if he remained inactive, the planes would continue to crash with alarming regularity regardless. At least through his interventions, they were afforded a fighting chance at survival. The fundamental principle underpinning his forbidden fix was strikingly straightforward: to ingeniously introduce redundancy into critical systems where Boeing's original design had conspicuously omitted it. Consider, for instance, the hydraulic system, initially characterized by its sleek, efficient, single-bundle design. Zook's transformative approach was to convert this streamlined arrangement into a complex, yet functional, labyrinth of backup lines, a sight that might well be described as a plumber's worst nightmare. Yet, this intricate network was specifically engineered to maintain operability even when the primary system suffered a direct hit. Zook initiated his clandestine operations by salvaging hydraulic tubing from the wreckage of damaged aircraft in the salvage yard, components that, according to official protocol, were designated to be returned for formal recycling. He would meticulously cut sections of this undamaged line, rigorously test them for pressure integrity using a makeshift hand pump he had ingeniously jury-rigged, and then painstakingly install them as crucial bypass routes within active combat aircraft. In practical application, Zook's innovation operated as follows. A standard B-17 was equipped with a singular main hydraulic line, extending from the pump directly to the landing gear actuators. Zook would strategically tap into this primary line at two distinct junctures, one positioned forward, in close proximity to the cockpit, and another aft, near the radio room. From these points, he would meticulously route a secondary line along an entirely different trajectory, typically artfully concealed and tucked along the fuselage stringers, where it received a measure of protection from the aircraft's structural members. Subsequently, he would install manual isolation valves at each of these junction points, utilizing parts ingeniously cannibalized from other damaged bombers. Should the primary line sustain a hit and consequently lose pressure, the pilot could, with a swift and deliberate action, reach down. Zook had thoughtfully mounted the valves within easy arm's reach and manually activate the backup line, thereby restoring vital hydraulic function. This solution, it must be conceded, was far from elegant. It undeniably introduced additional weight to the aircraft. Furthermore, it flagrantly violated the precise stipulations of Technical Order ZO-120-EG-2 Section 4, Paragraph 12, Subsection C. Yet, despite these drawbacks, it represented the crucial difference between a controlled landing on functioning wheels and a terrifying, uncontrolled belly slide down the runway, fraught with desperate prayers for survival. The modification Zook devised for the fuel system was even more audacious in its concept. He recognized the immutable reality that preventing fuel lines from being hit during a perilous flight through anti-aircraft flak was simply impossible. However, he could, with his ingenuity, prevent a single hit from escalating into a complete and catastrophic system failure. His solution involved the installation of crossover valves between the various tank systems, utilizing robust fuel petcocks originally designed for ground refueling operations. Officially, these specific valves were intended solely for use on the ground. Undeterred, Zook installed them in positions that were readily accessible to the crew during flight, meticulously documenting them on maintenance forms as refueling system check valves, a description that was technically accurate, yet deliberately vague in its implication. With this modification in place, when a fuel line sustained damage, pilots now possessed the critical ability to isolate the compromised tank and deftly reroute fuel flow from the remaining intact tanks directly to the engines that required it. However, the most profound and life-saving modification Zook implemented involved the electrical system. B-17s were equipped with a primary electrical bus that supplied power to every critical component, ranging from the intricate flight instruments to the powerful motors of the gun turrets. A single hit to this central bus meant the aircraft would instantly fly dark, instruments would fail, radio communications would cease, and the vital gun turrets would become inoperable. Zook ingeniously began running secondary power lines directly from the auxiliary generator to the most critical systems, completely bypassing the vulnerable main bus. He would artfully conceal these new lines within existing cable bundles, making them appear indistinguishable from factory wiring until their true routing was meticulously traced. To aid pilots, he employed a distinct color of insulation, yellow instead of the standard black, ensuring that crews could easily identify which breakers controlled these essential emergency backup systems. The true genius of Zook's methodology lay not in the invention of novel technologies. Indeed, every component he utilized was already present on the aircraft or readily available in the existing parts bins. His brilliance resided in his ability to reconfigure these familiar puzzle pieces in ways that Boeing's engineers had simply not contemplated, primarily because their focus had been on optimizing manufacturing efficiency rather than maximizing combat survivability. A bomber rolling off the Seattle production line in 1943 was meticulously designed for rapid assembly by a workforce, many of whom had been housewives just 6 months prior. Zook's intricate modifications demanded the expertise of a highly skilled mechanic, one who possessed a profound understanding of systems theory and, crucially, harbored no fear of deviating from the established blueprint when that blueprint was demonstrably contributing to the loss of human lives. By January 1944, Zook had, with quiet determination, modified 17 B-17s within the 351st Bomb Group. He never sought recognition or advertised his work. He never formally documented his unauthorized changes. Instead, he simply executed the modifications during the quiet solitude of night maintenance shifts, a time when fewer officers were present to pose uncomfortable inquiries. And, remarkably, those 17 modified bombers were returning from their perilous missions at a rate that was beginning to defy all statistical probability. February 8, 1944. Captain Ronald Fletcher, the engineering officer for the 351st Bomb Group, was already enduring a particularly trying morning, a situation that was about to escalate dramatically. He was conducting routine maintenance inspections, the kind where aircraft are randomly selected from the flight line to verify their adherence to technical documentation, when he opened the hydraulic access panel on a B-17 affectionately named Devil's Daughter. What he discovered within was a labyrinth of plumbing that, by all official standards, simply should not exist. Fletcher was no fool. He had been an aeronautical engineering student at MIT before the war, possessing an astute ability to interpret complex blueprints. What lay before his eyes was utterly absent from any Boeing blueprint he had ever encountered. There were secondary hydraulic lines snaking through non-standard routes. Manual isolation valves had been meticulously installed in locations that necessitated custom-fabricated bracketry. Fuel crossover connections had been ingeniously fashioned using parts that appeared to originate from at least 3 different aircraft. And, critically, all of this work had been executed with a level of craftsmanship that strongly suggested it was not the result of some hasty, sloppy field expedient. This was, undeniably, deliberate, thoroughly conceived, and expertly implemented modification. He located Zook in Hangar 3, engrossed in the demanding task of an engine swap. "Sergeant, we need to discuss Devil's Daughter's hydraulic system," Fletcher stated directly. Zook, without even glancing up from the cowling he was meticulously torquing, responded, "What about it?" Fletcher, clipboard in hand, pressed on. "What about it? What about the fact that there are approximately 40 feet of unauthorized hydraulic line installed in non-standard routing with manually operated valves that are not listed in the technical orders?" Zook slowly lowered his wrench, wiped his grimy hands on a rag that was, and probably, even dirtier than his hands, and fixed Fletcher with a gaze that conveyed an equal measure of profound weariness and unwavering defiance. "You want the official answer, or the real one?" Fletcher's retort was immediate and unequivocal. "Both." "Starting with how long you've been doing this, and how many aircraft are affected." 17 planes. That specific number caused Fletcher's blood pressure to surge. 17 active service aircraft operating with undocumented modifications to their primary flight systems. The sheer magnitude of the regulatory violation was staggering. Zook faced the very real prospect of a court-martial. Fletcher himself could be subjected to disciplinary action for his failure to detect these infractions sooner. But then, Fletcher posed the pivotal question that irrevocably altered the entire dynamic. Have any of these 17 aircraft experienced hydraulic failure? Zook, reaching into the pocket of his coveralls, produced a grease-stained notebook, his personal maintenance log, entirely separate from any official record. 3 of them took flak hits to primary hydraulic lines. All 3 made it home safely on the backup system. Devil's Daughter, for instance, landed on her own gear just 2 weeks ago after an 88mm round completely destroyed her primary line over Frankfurt. The pilot didn't even realize he was operating on the backup until I pointed out the damage during his post-flight inspection. Fletcher mentally calculated the implications. 3 catastrophic hydraulic hits, yet 0 aircraft losses. Standard statistics would have predicted that at least 2 of those planes should have been irretrievably lost. By noon, Fletcher had escalated the matter to Group Commander Albertson, the very same colonel who had witnessed the miraculous landing of Lucky Strike back in December. By 1400 hours, Albertson was personally in the hangar, meticulously inspecting Zook's modifications, with Fletcher providing detailed technical narration. And by 1600 hours, a decidedly uncomfortable meeting was unfolding in the group operations office, where the pressing question under intense deliberation was whether to court-martial Sergeant Zook or, perhaps, to bestow upon him a medal for his extraordinary ingenuity. The authorities faced a stark choice: to subject Staff Sergeant Zook to disciplinary proceedings, or to commend him for his profound ingenuity. In response to this escalating dilemma, Major Henry Watkins, a distinguished officer from the 8th Air Force Engineering Staff, arrived on February 10th, tasked with initiating a comprehensive formal investigation. Over the course of 3 intensive days, he meticulously examined Zook's extensively modified aircraft, painstakingly documenting every unauthorized installation through photography, scrutinizing exhaustive maintenance logs, and conducting in-depth interviews with the pilots who had flown these altered machines. His initial findings, encapsulated in a preliminary report submitted on February 13th, featured a pivotal paragraph. This particular section, likely crafted with considerable deliberation, subtly but unequivocally acknowledged a deeply uncomfortable truth. The Army Air Forces had, for an indeterminate period, been deploying its courageous aircrews into perilous combat zones aboard aircraft inherently susceptible to preventable vulnerabilities. This crucial passage from Major Watkins' report stated, with carefully chosen language, that while Staff Sergeant Zook's inventive modifications were undeniably unauthorized and stood in direct contravention of established technical orders, an initial comprehensive analysis strongly indicated that these alterations proficiently addressed a fundamental systemic vulnerability embedded within the original hydraulic and fuel system designs. This inherent flaw, the report implied, was a probable contributing factor to the distressing number of combat losses experienced by the bomber fleet. Consequently, the report judiciously recommended abstaining from any punitive measures against Zook, advocating instead for a thorough engineering evaluation and rigorously controlled testing to definitively assess the efficacy and safety of his innovations. The profound implications of that single, cautiously worded paragraph extended far beyond merely safeguarding Zook's military career. It inadvertently unlatched a Pandora's box, revealing a disturbing truth that virtually no one within the Pentagon wished to confront. This newly opened door invited disquieting inquiries into the tragic toll of aircrews lost, prompting a re-examination of whether Boeing's fundamental design philosophy had, perhaps inadvertently, prioritized streamlined production efficiency over the critical imperative of combat survivability. In response to this delicate situation, Albertson, exercising his authority, rendered a pivotal command decision, one that likely stretched the boundaries of existing regulations itself. While Zook was spared from facing any formal charges, he was concurrently prohibited from implementing any further modifications to aircraft until the comprehensive engineering evaluation had reached its conclusion. Nevertheless, in a pragmatic acknowledgement of their proven effectiveness, those existing 17 modified bombers were permitted to continue their vital combat missions, a testament to the undeniable evidence of enhanced survival statistics, which even the most entrenched high-ranking officials could not disregard. Major Watkins, having secured the necessary backing and resources, made his return to Bassingbourn on March 3, 1944. This time, he was accompanied by a formidable contingent, 2 seasoned Boeing engineers, alongside a specialized team of technical experts from the Army Air Forces. Their collective mission was underpinned by an exceptionally urgent and unambiguous directive, which, in essence, commanded them to either conclusively demonstrate the functional efficacy of Zook's modifications or, conversely, to definitively prove their inherent danger. The implicit, yet palpable, addendum to this mandate was one of extreme haste, driven by the grim reality that the Allied forces were experiencing an unsustainable attrition rate of their precious bomber fleet over the fiercely contested skies of Germany. What subsequently unfolded represented an unparalleled chapter in military aviation history, an engineering validation process that was simultaneously characterized by its extraordinary informality and its immensely high stakes. This unique scenario involves subjecting unauthorized field modifications to rigorous evaluation under the crucible of actual combat conditions, all while the individuals involved grappled with the profound dilemma of whether their findings should be meticulously documented as groundbreaking innovation or, chillingly, as incriminating evidence for a potential court-martial proceeding. Upon their initial inspection, the 2 Boeing engineers, both civilian contractors operating under military agreements, were visibly appalled by the makeshift ingenuity before them. The senior engineer, a distinguished individual named Carlson, who possessed an intimate knowledge of the original B-17 design, having contributed to its inception in Seattle, spent his inaugural hour at Bassingbourn articulating his profound dismay. His vocabulary was saturated with technical misgivings, citing contamination risk, raising pressure regulation concerns, and warning of potential catastrophic failure modes. Standing before a partially disassembled bomber, he gestured emphatically at Zook's improvised bypass lines, meticulously elucidating to Watkins precisely why such an unorthodox arrangement could not, by any conventional engineering logic, function effectively. His core argument rested on the premise that these modifications flagrantly contravene the fundamental hydraulic system design principles, tenets meticulously established by highly qualified professionals possessing advanced engineering degrees. Staff Sergeant Zook, a figure of gritty practicality in his grease-stained coveralls, patiently allowed the eloquent engineer to conclude his detailed technical indictment. Once Carlson had finished, Zook posed a pointed, deceptively simple question that cut directly to the heart of their differing perspectives. When, precisely, was the last occasion you personally experienced the realities of a combat mission? Carlson visibly stiffened at the implied challenge, responding with a terse, defensive assertion. I am an engineer, not a pilot. Zook, with a slow, deliberate nod, acknowledged the statement, then articulated the crux of their fundamental disagreement. Precisely, he conceded. Therefore, you conceptualized and designed this intricate system within the controlled environment of Seattle, a place where the most severe consequence you might encounter is a mere failed pressure test. In stark contrast, my daily reality involves meticulously maintaining these very aircraft when they return, often riddled with gaping holes, from the brutal crucible of aerial combat. It is, undeniably, a profoundly different perspective. Major Watkins then put forth a proposition that was nothing short of radical, particularly within the rigid confines of military protocol. He suggested outfitting a selection of Zook's modified aircraft with an array of supplementary pressure gauges, flow meters, and sophisticated monitoring equipment. The audacious next step involved dispatching these specially instrumented bombers on actual combat missions, meticulously recording their system performance throughout the perilous flights. Under any conventional, rational procurement process, such a critical evaluation would demand an extensive period of preliminary ground testing, typically spanning many months. However, the grim realities of March 1944 precluded such luxuries. The ferocious air war raging over Germany was reaching its brutal zenith, and the valiant 8th Air Force was enduring an unsustainable attrition rate, tragically losing an average of 6 heavy bombers on every single mission. Time, a precious commodity, was simply not on their side. They unequivocally did not possess the luxury of waiting for months. Commencing on March 5th and concluding on March 18th, an intensive period of operational testing commenced. During this span, a contingent of 5 B-17s, each equipped with Zook's innovative modifications, embarked on a total of 11 perilous combat missions. Their designated targets spanned strategically vital locations deep within enemy territory, including the heavily defended cities of Berlin, Brunswick, and Friedrichshafen. Each of these specially prepared aircraft was laden with sophisticated additional instrumentation, meticulously recording critical parameters such as hydraulic pressure, precise fuel flow rates, and overall electrical system performance for the entire duration of every mission. Notably, 3 of these bombers sustained significant battle damage during their engagements. Yet, against daunting odds, every single one of the 5 aircraft successfully returned to base. The accumulated data, a testament to Zook's ingenuity, was unequivocally irrefutable. A particularly dramatic and illustrative incident occurred during the mission to Friedrichshafen on March 18th. The bomber designated Memphis Belle II, which was among the aircraft featuring Zook's modifications, sustained a direct hit from an 88mm flak burst. This devastating impact completely shredded the primary hydraulic line at precisely the point where Boeing's original design had routed it, exposed and vulnerable, along the bomb bay. The onboard instrumentation captured a chillingly rapid sequence of events. The primary system pressure plummeted catastrophically, registering a drop to 0 within a mere 4.2 seconds. Under standard operational protocols, and according to the original aircraft design, this level of system failure should have rendered the aircraft utterly incapable of controlling its vital landing gear, essential flaps, or critical braking mechanisms. However, the pilot of Memphis Belle II, meticulously adhering to the specific briefing instructions personally imparted by Zook, acted with swift precision. He reached down and engaged 3 manual isolation valves, immediately activating the ingenious backup system. Miraculously, the hydraulic pressure stabilized at 85% of its normal operating level, a figure admittedly lower than the optimal, but critically, still well within the acceptable operational range. Against all conventional expectations, the bomber steadfastly maintained its formation, successfully completed its critical bomb run, and ultimately executed a safe landing at Bassingbourn, deploying its own landing gear. As this improbable recovery unfolded, engineers monitoring their equipment on the ground observed with a mixture of disbelief and profound realization. They were witnessing the undeniable performance of a hydraulic system that had defied its own catastrophic failure, an outcome that, by all established design principles, simply should not have been possible. Carlson, the highly respected Boeing engineer, observed the meticulous data playback in a state of profound, stunned silence. The empirical evidence was starkly at odds with his deeply ingrained theoretical knowledge. Finally, he turned to Watkins, uttering a confession that likely required considerable professional humility to voice. This system, by all engineering tenets, simply shouldn't function. The underlying pressure dynamics are fundamentally incorrect. The calculated flow rates are demonstrably inadequate, and there is a conspicuous absence of proper filtration within the bypass system. Yet, despite all these theoretical deficiencies, it unequivocally works. I confess, I do not comprehend the precise mechanism of its success, but the undeniable fact remains, it works. From his position at the rear of the briefing room, Zook, with characteristic bluntness, offered a concise explanation that, while profoundly insightful, was almost certainly omitted from any subsequent official report. It functions, he stated plainly, because its fundamental design premise was to operate effectively precisely when every other component has already succumbed to catastrophic failure. Your meticulously engineered system performs flawlessly under ideal conditions, right up until the point it ceases to function altogether. My system, in contrast, operates with a degree of imperfection consistently, but crucially, it steadfastly continues to perform its essential duty relentlessly. The rigorous testing phase culminated in the compilation of an extensive body of evidence, comprising 47 meticulous pages of technical data, alongside 11 detailed mission after action reports. This formidable collection of findings led to an inescapable conclusion, one that even the most conservative elements within Air Force engineering could no longer plausibly disregard. The unequivocal verdict was that Zook's ingenious modifications had demonstrably enhanced the overall system survivability of the aircraft, crucially, without any detrimental impact on the primary system's fundamental operational functionality. In essence, the clear translation of these complex findings was that Staff Sergeant Zook had successfully rendered the bomber significantly safer, achieving this vital improvement without introducing any corresponding degradation in their performance or reliability. On March 22, Major Watkins formally submitted his comprehensive final report, which included a pivotal recommendation destined to reverberate throughout every single B-17 squadron stationed across England. His decisive counsel called for the immediate authorization of field modifications based directly on Zook's innovative design, coupled with the imperative to commence intensive training for mechanics across all constituent groups of the 8th Air Force. This directive signaled a profound shift in operational policy, acknowledging the undeniable efficacy of the grassroots engineering solution. As April 1944 dawned, a stark dichotomy unfolded. While the distant echelons of the Pentagon engaged in protracted debates over official procurement channels, and Boeing meticulously negotiated the terms of retrofit contracts, agreements that would not realistically materialize before June at the absolute earliest, a far more dynamic and organic process was simultaneously taking root across the various airfields dotting East Anglia. Here, the vital network of mechanics was actively engaging in crucial informal exchanges. And when these highly practical individuals communicate, their discussions invariably bypass the intricacies of bureaucratic policy, focusing instead with laser precision on the pragmatic realities of what works. Staff Sergeant Mike Delacroix, serving with the 303rd Bomb Group stationed at Molesworth, first became aware of Zook's groundbreaking modifications through a crew chief who had recently transferred from Bassingbourn. By April 8, Delacroix had seized an opportunity during a routine supply run to visit Bassingbourn, arriving with a notebook in hand, eager to personally solicit Zook's guidance through the intricate process of installing the hydraulic bypass system. Zook, demonstrating his commitment to practical knowledge sharing, dedicated 3 exhaustive hours to meticulously demonstrating every critical connection point, illustrating each precise valve placement, and explaining the rationale behind every routing decision. Armed with this invaluable instruction, Delacroix promptly returned to Molesworth and commenced modifying aircraft that very night. With remarkable speed, within a mere week, the 303rd Bomb Group proudly boasted 5 of its bombers operating effectively with Zook's enhanced system. The vital information continued its rapid dissemination, reaching Technical Sergeant James Wu at Thorpe Abbotts, who learned of the innovative design directly from Delacroix. By April 15th, the imperative to adopt this life-saving innovation had reached the 100th Bomb Group, famously known as the Bloody 100th, a unit tragically burdened with the unenviable distinction of possessing the worst loss rate within the entire 8th Air Force. Faced with such devastating attrition, their mechanics, driven by a desperate urgency, commenced working double shifts, toiling tirelessly to install the critical bypass systems on every single operational aircraft within their fleet. They exhibited no patience for official authorization, nor did they bother with the bureaucratic formality of filing modification requests. Their actions were a direct, visceral response to the harrowing experience of witnessing far too many bombers succumb to damage that, by all rights, should have been entirely survivable. This widespread, unauthorized adoption was, in essence, a burgeoning grassroots engineering revolution, rapidly propagating through informal, highly efficient networks, all while the ponderous official channels remained mired in endless debates over committee structures and procedural intricacies. At Kimbolton, Master Sergeant Robert Chin, demonstrating remarkable foresight and initiative, began meticulously compiling vital statistics that the official Air Force channels had not yet commenced tracking. His unofficial data revealed a stark contrast. In March, prior to the implementation of any modifications, the 379th Bomb Group had endured a significant 14% abort rate attributed to mechanical failures occurring during critical missions. By late April, however, with 12 of their aircraft now operating with Zook's enhanced modifications, that alarming rate had plummeted dramatically to a mere 6%. Chen's personal logbook, though unofficial and entirely unrecognized by formal channels, unveiled an even more compelling and striking revelation. Modified aircraft that sustained battle damage were unequivocally 3 times more likely to successfully return to their home base compared to their unmodified counterparts enduring comparable levels of combat damage. The long-awaited official authorization finally materialized on April 28, 1944, formally issued as Technical Order 01-20 EG-2127, bearing the title, Field Modification for Enhanced Hydraulic System Redundancy in B-17F and B-17G Aircraft. This document, spanning 6 pages of dense bureaucratic language, essentially granted legal sanction for mechanics to perform modifications that dozens of their colleagues had, in practice, already been implementing for weeks. However, the technical order was notably circumspect and deliberately limited in its scope. It unequivocally authorized the critical hydraulic modifications, but conspicuously omitted any reference to Zook's equally vital fuel system crossovers or his ingenious electrical bypasses. This glaring omission was a direct consequence of Boeing's persistent insistence that these additional measures were not only superfluous, but also potentially hazardous, despite the compelling field evidence. Upon reviewing the newly issued technical order, Staff Sergeant Zook reacted with a profound, bitter laugh, not one of joy or satisfaction, but rather the cynical, knowing chuckle of an individual who had narrowly escaped a court-martial at the hands of the very bureaucracy he now observed attempting to claim credit for implementing merely a partial solution. This same bureaucratic apparatus had nearly condemned him for his life-saving innovations, and now it was selectively adopting his work. Undeterred by the limited official directive, Zook, with his unwavering commitment to his fellow airmen, returned to his clandestine work, diligently installing fuel crossovers during the night shift, unauthorized as ever. For him, the official pronouncements emanating from headquarters held little sway. They did nothing to alter the grim reality that B-17s continued to be lost due to preventable fuel system failures, a problem he was determined to resolve, regardless of official sanction. Aircraft were persistently succumbing to catastrophic fuel system malfunctions, a critical flaw that continued to plague operational flights and endanger invaluable aircrews. This persistent vulnerability demanded an immediate and effective remedy to safeguard the lives of those flying combat missions. By the advent of May 1944, the ingenious field modification, initially conceived by Paul Zook, had clandestinely proliferated, finding its way onto an estimated 120 aircraft dispersed across a commendable 7 distinct bomb groups. This remarkable reach stood in stark contrast to the mere 41 aircraft officially recorded as having received the modification under the newly issued technical order. This pronounced disparity between the authorized count and the actual implementation underscored a pervasive sentiment among ground mechanics, confronted with rigid regulations and the undeniable reality of vulnerable aircraft. They collectively echoed Zook's initial resolve. They chose to embrace the pragmatic wisdom that, when human lives hung in the balance, seeking pardon for a necessary intervention was far preferable to awaiting formal permission. Undeniable evidence of the modification's efficacy soon began to manifest in compelling survival statistics, which the Air Force leadership found increasingly difficult to dismiss. The 341st Bomb Group, Zook's original unit, where virtually every operational B-17 had been outfitted with a comprehensive suite of enhancements, including the unsanctioned fuel and electrical work, registered a remarkably low loss rate of 2.1% during May 1944. This figure stood in stark and favorable contrast to the broader 8th Air Force average, which hovered at a considerably higher 3.8%. While that seemingly modest percentage difference might not immediately convey its profound impact, when extrapolated across a month of intense aerial operations involving thousands of bomber sorties, it translated into a tangible and significant outcome. This difference meant scores of aircrews returned safely to base, rather than being tragically categorized as missing in action. Recognizing the undeniable trend, Colonel Albertson, in a decisive move that could be interpreted as either a stroke of brilliant foresight or a perilous gamble with his career, extended an invitation to an 8th Air Force statistical analysis team. They were summoned to Bassingbourn in early June to meticulously scrutinize the group's survival data. With unflinching transparency, he laid bare all the information, the officially sanctioned modifications, the crucial unofficial enhancements, and the irrefutable numerical evidence. The subsequent report from the analysis team, formally submitted on June 9, contained a pivotal sentence that unequivocally validated the practical wisdom long held by every mechanic working tirelessly on the flight line. It declared, "Statistical correlation between modified aircraft and improved survivability is significant beyond normal variance and warrants expanded implementation." With this pronouncement, what had once been a defiant act of innovation had officially been elevated to policy. Zook's pioneering methodology had, in essence, become a recognized template. Yet, even as official recognition began to catch up, mechanics throughout England continued their clandestine, after-hours work, implementing unauthorized modifications, because the formal directives had not yet fully encompassed the complete, life-saving solution. In their dedication, these sergeants, armed with wrenches and a profound conviction, embodied Zook's spirit, choosing to prioritize the safe return of crews over rigid adherence to the manual. By August 1945, 3 months after the cessation of hostilities in Europe, a dedicated statistician at Air Force Headquarters, Captain Dorothy Henshaw, meticulously compiled a comprehensive report. Though it would never achieve widespread publication, its numerical findings presented an unassailable narrative. Captain Henshaw had painstakingly gathered mission data from every B-17 group operating within the 8th Air Force. She then cross-referenced this with detailed maintenance logs, which, crucially, included documentation of aircraft that had received Zook's modifications, both the officially sanctioned ones and the unofficial enhancements that mechanics had carefully recorded after their initial implementation. Her subsequent correlation analysis was so rigorous, it would undoubtedly have garnered the commendation of her statistics professors. The report's findings were compelling. Groups that had achieved a 75% or greater adoption rate of the full modification package, encompassing hydraulic, fuel, and electrical systems, demonstrated a remarkable 23.4% improvement in aircraft return rates when compared to their operational baseline prior to these modifications. This significant percentage translated into a tangible 347 bombers that successfully made it home, rather than being lost over the treacherous skies of Germany or the unforgiving waters of the North Sea. When considering that each aircraft typically carried 10 crew members, and accounting for instances where some crew members survived even when their aircraft were lost, Zook's once forbidden intervention was credited with preserving the lives of an estimated 3,000 to 4,000 airmen who would otherwise have faced death, capture, or the grim fate of being missing in action. However, the most profound and impactful statistic remained somewhat obscured within the appendices of Henshaw's detailed report. It revealed that aircraft equipped with the complete Zook modification package, even when sustaining Category 3 damage, defined as damage necessitating major repair or system replacement, managed to return to base an astonishing 81% of the time. In stark contrast, unmodified aircraft suffering identical levels of severe damage achieved a return rate of only 47%. This crucial data underscored that the modifications had not rendered the B-17s invulnerable, but they had fundamentally transformed what would have been statistically designated as a loss into an actual, demonstrable survival. Paul Zook concluded his service with the Army Air Forces in November 1945, honorably mustering out with the rank of Technical Sergeant. He was awarded an Army Commendation Medal, recognizing his exceptional technical proficiency in aircraft maintenance. Yet, conspicuously absent from his official service record was any mention of the groundbreaking field modifications that had unequivocally defined his profound contribution to the war effort. He subsequently returned to his hometown of Pittsburgh, where he promptly reopened his repair shop on Polish Hill. For the ensuing 3 decades, he dedicated himself to the practical work of fixing cars, trucks, and occasionally, an airplane belonging to a local flying club. He remained a man of quiet demeanor, rarely speaking of his wartime experiences. It was not until 1973 that a diligent researcher named Dr. Michael Torres, affiliated with the Air Force Historical Research Agency, embarked on a comprehensive study of wartime field modifications. In the course of his research, Torres successfully located Zook. Dr. Torres spent 3 illuminating days in Pittsburgh, conducting extensive interviews with Zook and meticulously reviewing the personal maintenance logs Zook had meticulously kept throughout the war, grease-stained notebooks that had, until then, never entered official records. During their conversations, Torres posed a pivotal question, one that perhaps should have been asked 3 decades earlier. What had compelled Zook to risk court-martial by undertaking unauthorized modifications? Zook's response, carefully transcribed in Torres's interview notes, was delivered with characteristic directness and simplicity. "It didn't seem that risky to me. Guys were dying because the planes weren't built right. I could fix that, or I could follow the manual. Seemed like an easy choice. His words encapsulated a profound moral clarity that prioritized human life over bureaucratic adherence. The very first B-17 Zook had modified, christened Lucky Strike, the bomber that had initiated this transformative journey in December 1943, successfully endured the entirety of the war. It was eventually decommissioned and scrapped in 1954. Nevertheless, photographs capturing its hydraulic bay, taken during the 1944 engineering evaluation, found their way into Air Force maintenance training manuals, where they remained in use well into the 1960s. The accompanying captions, however, never explicitly named Zook, instead referring generically to field-developed redundancy modifications. Consequently, generations of aircraft mechanics benefited from his ingenious work, absorbing its principles without ever knowing the identity of its original, unsung architect. Boeing, the aircraft manufacturer, eventually integrated key elements of Zook's modifications into the production run of the B-17G model, commencing in late 1944. Despite this practical adoption, official documentation attributed these crucial changes to ongoing engineering refinement, rather than acknowledging that they were, in fact, incorporating field fixes developed by a sergeant with only a high school education, whose practical engineering acumen had been honed through years of keeping Depression-era trucks operational. Furthermore, post-war bomber programs, including the B-29 and B-50, incorporated redundant hydraulic and fuel systems as fundamental design features, lessons profoundly learned through the crucible of combat over Germany, and subsequently applied by engineers who had thoroughly reviewed the extensive wartime modification data. Paul Zook passed away in 1989 at the age of 72. His obituary, published in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, made no specific mention of B-17s or his pivotal role in the war, simply noting that he was a veteran who had successfully operated Zook's auto repair for 4 decades. Following his death, his invaluable personal maintenance logs, the unofficial, yet meticulously detailed, record of every aircraft he had modified, were generously donated to the Air Force Museum in Dayton. These 47 notebooks now reside in the research archives, accessible to any inquirer. They are filled with intricate technical sketches, pressure calculations scrawled in the margins, and annotations penned in a mechanic's distinctive shorthand, collectively narrating the authentic story of how one man's unwavering refusal to strictly adhere to the manual dramatically altered the odds for thousands of airmen who would forever remain unaware of his name. Ultimately, the once forbidden trick evolved into standard operational practice. The Maverick, through his sheer ingenuity and courage, became an enduring template for problem solving. And the profound lesson that sometimes the individuals closest to a problem possess an unparalleled insight into solutions that engineers in distant offices may overlook, remains strikingly relevant. This truth resurfaces every time a difficult choice must be made between rigid adherence to a manual and the practical exigencies of what truly works when human lives hang precariously in the balance.